Jasmine Crockett faced Ellen DeGeneres's sly jabs. She made her regret instantly on air. It was supposed to be another cheerful afternoon talk show. Dancing lights, cheerful crowd, a host known for her infectious laugh, and a guest, a sitting congresswoman ready to talk about policy politics, maybe even her skincare routine if the segment ran long. But when Jasmine Crockett sat down across from Ellen DeGeneres that day, America witnessed something they weren't prepared for the moment. A black woman refused to be charming just to stay palatable. Because when Ellen smiled wide and said, "You've got quite the attitude in Congress," she expected laughter. What she got was silence. Then clarity. Then the kind of truth that makes an entire studio freeze. "I've noticed something," Jasmine said, her voice steady, not a hint of hesitation. "When men are direct, they're assertive. When women are, they're emotional. But when black women are suddenly, it's attitude." And just like that, the entire temperature in the room shifted. This wasn't a clapback. It was a recalibration of tone, of power, of what it means to be on in front of America's cameras without losing yourself for applause. The appearance had started innocently enough. A last-minute email invite from Ellen's production team, a bright, vague promise of mixing in more serious voices. Jasmine's team, cautious but intrigued, asked the right questions. Will it be light? Yes. Will it be respectful? Of course. Will there be a moment where Ellen slips in a playful jab to keep the mood up? Probably. But Jasmine knew what she was walking into. She's been walking into it her entire life. Don't laugh, just to keep the peace, she told herself on the flight to Los Angeles. That's how they win. That's how they box you in. Her comms director, Talia Brooks, was even more blunt. They want your energy, not your voice. Be ready. And she was. The set was colder than she expected. The green room looked more like a spa than a prep space perfectly sterile. The makeup team offered friendly smiles. One producer told her she looked bold, then backtracked when Jasmine stared just a second too long. They rehearsed nothing. Ellen didn't stop by to say hello before the taping. Not unusual, but telling. A distance that felt curated. When Jasmine was led to the edge of the stage, the staff's energy changed. Tense smiles, rushed instructions. And when Ellen finally appeared, it was with the same toothy grin that's made her beloved for decades. But Jasmine saw something behind it. A calculation, a preparation. And she knew this was about to be more than a segment. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Ellen shouted to cheers as Jasmine stepped onto the stage. "You clean up nice," Ellen quipped with that sparkle in her voice that made it sound playful. Jasmine smiled once. "I clean up every day. Congress just doesn't hand out makeup artists." The audience laughed, but not everyone. Some felt the shift. A few producers flinched behind the cameras. Ellen, clearly a little surprised by the quick retort, moved on. They talked about Texas, about Jasmine's journey from criminal justice reform to Congress. Jasmine remained cool, thoughtful, intentional. She knew the terrain. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to be heard. And then the moment. "So," Ellen said with a smirk, "let's talk about that clip. You know, the one where you lit up that committee guy. That attitude. My staff watches that every Monday." She mimicked Jasmine's hand gestures, waving a finger in the air like a caricature of an angry black woman. The crowd laughed, but Jasmine didn't. She straightened, took a breath, and detonated the conversation in a single unwavering sentence. "Calling that attitude isn't playful," she said. "It's dismissive." The silence hit like a wave. Ellen blinked. Jasmine leaned in, eyes steady. "Is it passionate? Yes, because I'm defending people who've been ignored. Am I expressive? Sure, but calling that attitude, that's not about tone, that's about control." Ellen fumbled. "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. You know I love strong women. I mean, I married one." A few awkward chuckles from the crowd. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. Loving strong women doesn't mean you get to reduce their power to a punchline. That was the line. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Ellen looked small, not because she was being attacked, but because she realized she had just walked into a moment far bigger than she could control. Jasmine kept going now, turning slightly to face the audience. "There's this expectation that black women are supposed to laugh along when someone pokes fun at our tone, like we're in on the joke, even when the joke's on us." Her voice remained soft, her presence thunderous. "I'm not here to be funny, I'm here to be heard." The crowd was dead still. No laughter, no applause sign lit up. Just eyes wide open and heads turning slowly from Ellen to Jasmine. Ellen tried to shift gears. "So, what's the most surprising part about being in Congress?" Jasmine paused, then smiled. "How often people expect me to shrink." This time the audience clapped, not politely, but because they recognized something real. It was a rupture not just in the moment, but in the format, in what this kind of television was supposed to be. Ellen had invited a voice, but she got a presence, one that refused to play along. Backstage producers whispered frantically, Someone in the control room suggested cutting the segment early. But the damage or the breakthrough, depending on your view, had already happened. Because this wasn't just about a congresswoman refusing to be belittled. This was about America witnessing a kind of strength it didn't know how to process. Not performative, not angry, just unwilling to shrink. And when the cameras cut to commercial and Ellen reached for a sip of water to pretend nothing had shifted, Jasmine stood and walked off stage, not in defiance, but in dignity. And in that silence, the kind that always follows truth, every viewer watching knew she hadn't gone viral. She'd gone deeper. And the people in the studio knew it even if they didn't yet have the language to describe what had just happened. Even if their job was to smile, clap, and keep things moving. Even if the applause sign blinked and their hands moved on instinct, the shift in the room was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett didn't leave the stage angry. She left it centered. And that stillness, that refusal to shrink, spoke louder than any clapback ever could. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't performed. She hadn't begged to be understood. She had done the one thing America is least prepared for when it comes to powerful black women. She had simply told the truth and waited for the room to deal with it. Backstage, the atmosphere was tight. No one was shouting. No one was pointing fingers. But the air was thick with what hadn't gone according to script. A producer adjusted her headset 3 times in 30 seconds. Another assistant fumbled over a water bottle and muttered, "This one's gonna trend." Talia, Jasmine's communications director, met her at the edge of the curtain with that kind of half-laugh you give someone after a lightning strike. "You didn't flinch," she whispered. "I wasn't there to flinch," Jasmine replied. Meanwhile, Ellen was still on stage trying to pivot. The next segment began with a celebrity dog trainer and a rescue puppy. The audience cooed, clapped, tried to reset. But the tone had already been rewritten. What had just happened wasn't a moment that faded when the cameras cut. It was a break in the format, a fracture in the routine, a recalibration of expectation. Back in her dressing room, Jasmine sat down in silence, not tense, not triumphant, just present. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then nonstop. She flipped it face down. "Let it breathe," she told Talia, who was already fielding interview requests and social media alerts. And it did breathe. It inhaled across TikTok, where a 30-second clip of Jasmine saying, "I'm not here to be funny, I'm here to be heard," hit 2 million views in 3 hours. It moved through Twitter, where one thread began. "Let's talk about what just happened on Ellen," because it was historic. It pulsed through Instagram stories where creators began overlaying Jasmine's quotes on slow-motion shots of her walking off stage, the studio lights blurring behind her, like a storm she'd just walked through untouched. But the virality wasn't just entertainment, it was recognition. A black high school teacher in Atlanta stitched the clip with her own commentary saying, "That wasn't a takedown. That was a textbook example of holding space." A Gen Z college student from Chicago tweeted she didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. And a middle-aged white woman in Colorado wrote on Facebook, "I used to love Ellen, but now I can't unsee how uncomfortable she got when faced with someone she couldn't reduce to a meme." By the end of the day, the headline on HuffPost read, "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett redefines composure in confrontation with Ellen." The Washington Post went further. "Respect isn't performance. Why Crockett's showdown resonates far beyond daytime TV." But not everyone was applauding. On conservative radio, one host sneered, "Another angry black woman moment dressed up in civility." Fox News ran a segment titled, "Did Ellen Get Ambushed on Her Own Show?" They called it unprofessional. They called Jasmine overly sensitive. They accused her of turning a friendly jab into a political spectacle. But the footage spoke for itself. There was no yelling, no slamming of hands, no walk-off. No dramatics, just a woman refusing to be flattened, and that refusal was for some more threatening than any explosion could have been. Inside the halls of Congress, Jasmine's moment became a conversation. Quietly, yes, but consistently. Colleagues from both sides sent her messages, some congratulatory, others awkward. One email read, "You stayed calm and somehow made a room full of people uncomfortable without ever raising your voice. That's power." Another simply said, "You made her blink." But for Jasmine, it wasn't about making Ellen blink. It wasn't about a soundbite. It wasn't about trending. It was about a decision not to play along. "I've played along before," she confided to Talia later that night in their hotel suite. "In meetings, in interviews, on panels, you smile, you let it slide, because that's how you survive. But at some point, survival becomes silence, and I didn't come all this way to be quiet." Talia nodded. "And now everybody's listening." They were, and they weren't just listening to the words. They were listening to the pause, the weight, the restraint, the refusal to give the audience what they expected: charm without challenge, fire without substance, presence without power. Instead, Jasmine had shifted the terms. And outside the media frenzy, the deeper impact was taking root. In classrooms, in board meetings, in kitchens. At a community center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a women's leadership group replayed the segment during their Saturday brunch. One attendee, a retired postal worker, said, "She did what we've all wanted to do. She looked someone in the face and said, 'I won't laugh just because you're uncomfortable.'" In Baltimore, a nonprofit used the clip to open a youth discussion about code switching and emotional labor. The title on the screen, "What Happens When You Don't Shrink." But Jasmine wasn't trying to lead a movement. She was trying to do her job and keep her dignity while doing it. And that's what scared people. Because in a media landscape built on oversimplifying identity, on reducing women, especially black women, to loud, angry, fierce, or sassy, what Jasmine did was uncategorize herself. She refused the punchline. And in doing so, she rewrote the whole bit. Ellen's PR team moved fast. They issued a statement. They edited the segment lightly for rebroadcast. They tweeted a vague reflection on learning to listen better. Some called it mature. Most called it calculated. And Jasmine. She didn't reply. She didn't retweet. She didn't dunk or double down. She posted a single line. "Visibility means nothing if it demands your silence." Under it, a black square with white text that read, "Thank you to everyone who refuses to shrink." It wasn't just a clapback. It was a blueprint. And a warning. Because the world had just learned, if you invite Jasmine Crockett into the room, be ready to hear all of her, not just the parts you think will play well in a clip. Because the world had just learned, if you invite Jasmine Crockett into the room, be ready to hear all of her, not just the parts you think will play well in a clip. And that was the lesson echoing across the country, far beyond studio lights and talk show circuits. In those 20-something seconds of clarity, Jasmine didn't just hold her ground, she made the whole room reconsider where the ground even was. And once you see someone do that without flinching, you don't forget it. By the next morning, the ripple had turned into a wave. CNN's early morning panel opened with the headline, "Congresswoman Crockett calm, clear, unapologetic." Commentators leaned forward in their chairs, parsing the moment not for political fallout, but cultural meaning. She didn't challenge Ellen's words, she challenged the entire setup, one analyst said. "We're so used to black women being entertaining, emotive, loud, or smiling. Jasmine Crockett gave us stillness. And that's why it hit harder than any viral burn. Elsewhere, the tone was less reflective. On a conservative blog, a writer posted Crockett Poole's race card on Ellen. Victimhood, now a badge of honor. That post was shared over 40,000 times. And yet buried underneath the punditry, the partisanship and the performative apologies, something real had been seeded, an awakening of sorts. Not just for viewers, for women who had spent their careers managing tone like landmines. For black women who had smiled their way through microaggressions because anything less was hostile. For the teachers, nurses, lawyers, aides, activists, interns, and middle managers who recognized themselves in Jasmine's restraint. At 11:04 a.m., Jasmine posted nothing. She didn't need to. Instead, a 15-year-old girl in Oklahoma named Alondra did. On her TikTok, she posted a selfie video, voice trembling a little, saying, "I watched that Congresswoman last night, and it was like, for once I saw someone not let the room tell her who to be. And she looked like me." The video had 600,000 views by nightfall. Back in D.C., Jasmine was back to work, hearings, briefings, constituency calls. She didn't mention Ellen. She didn't need to. The moment had passed, but the impact was just settling in. Talia walked into her office holding a stack of interview requests, endorsements, even a last-minute invitation from The View. Jasmine barely glanced up. "Anyone asking about policy? Not yet," Talia said, smirking. "But give it 48 hours. You flipped the script. Now they want the rest of the story." Jasmine nodded. "Then let's give them more than a reaction. Let's give them results." And that became the new strategy. No victory lap. No, "I told you so." Just a quiet pivot leveraging visibility into change. But not everyone wanted that. In Hollywood, Ellen's team scrambled behind the scenes. Her producers scheduled emergency meetings with PR consultants. A rewrite of the next show's opening monologue was already underway. She looked stiff. One exec whispered about Ellen in the segment, like she realized too late she wasn't the smartest person on the couch. Others in the building took a harsher tone. "You don't get to play Queen of Empathy and then mock a black congresswoman's delivery, like she's a character," one junior staffer said bluntly. Internally, there were calls for a reckoning with how we treat our guests. Externally, Ellen's team posted a tweet that read, "Sometimes you miss." That moment with Congresswoman Crockett reminded me that listening means letting go of assumptions. "I hear you. I'll do better." Replies were mixed. Some applauded. Others weren't buying it. One tweet under it read, "When someone holds a mirror up to you, don't blink. Learn." Meanwhile, online creators were doing just that. On YouTube, a political commentary channel titled Unscripted Women uploaded a 12-minute breakdown of the Crockett-Ellen moment. The thumbnail showed Ellen mid-smile, Jasmine mid-sentence, with the bold caption, "Not attitude, authority." The comments section read like a roll call of lived experience. "I've been called aggressive in every performance review I've had. All I was doing was asking for clarity. My manager once told me I intimidate people because I don't smile in meetings. I thought I was crazy until I saw this clip." Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every black woman who's ever been reduced to a personality trait. At the same time, institutions were taking note. A women's leadership program at a college in Michigan added Jasmine's segment to their media literacy curriculum. One professor called it a modern case study in intersectional communication and silent resistance. At a middle school in Oakland, a teacher printed Jasmine's quote, "Visibility means nothing if it requires silence," and posted it on the classroom wall. And yet, amid all this, Jasmine remained quiet. She spoke in policy memos, committee notes, and floor statements. She let the message echo on its own. Talia asked once, "Why not write it? Go on a few more shows. Make your case louder." Jasmine just shook her head. "They heard me. Now let's see what they do with it." But even as she moved forward, the moment kept rippling outward. A retired pastor in Georgia posted a video from his kitchen table, saying, "She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flex her title. She just told the truth and dared them to stay seated in it. That's ministry." A veteran in Detroit recorded a short podcast episode. "She didn't go to war. She went to work, and sometimes that's braver." And in a classroom in Dallas, a girl named Kira stood up during a presentation on public speaking and said, "Congresswoman Crockett showed me that clarity is power. I don't have to shout. I just have to stop shrinking." And that was the legacy already taking form. Not virality, not vengeance, but vocabulary, a new language for presence, for standing still without backing down, for holding a line without crossing it, for telling a nation on national television that being heard isn't a performance, it's a right. And Jasmine Crockett, she wasn't waiting for applause. She was already back in the room, mic on, voice steady, truth in hand. And this time, the world knew better than to expect her to smile for their comfort. That was the shift. Not just in Jasmine Crockett's presence, but in how people were finally starting to talk about it. She had drawn a line, and not with fire, not with spectacle, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that unsettles. That doesn't apologize for taking up space. That asks nothing but to be taken seriously, and demands everything because of it. And slowly that stillness was spreading. In classrooms, boardrooms, newsrooms, and barbershops, people weren't just sharing the clip, they were sharing the feeling it gave them. That strange blend of clarity and confrontation, of witnessing a moment that didn't erupt but revealed. A moment where someone told the truth so plainly it couldn't be ignored, spun, or sanitized. Jasmine's words were now showing up in unexpected places. A women's health clinic in Minneapolis printed her quote and posted it above the front desk, "I'm not here to be funny, I'm here to be heard." In a Detroit union hall, a welder passed out flyers with one sentence scrawled across the top, in bold block letters, "Don't shrink to fit their comfort." Even in places that had nothing to do with politics, like a hairstylist station in Miami, a yoga studio in Portland, or a community fridge in Oakland, her voice had traveled. Not because it had been boosted by algorithms, but because people had seen something in it they were desperate to name. A new kind of power, one that didn't explode, it exposed. Meanwhile, Ellen's studio was doing damage control. There were meetings, edits, phone calls to networks, carefully crafted apologies and reminders to staff that our core brand is kindness. But no one could escape the replay. The cut of Ellen saying attitude, the pause, and Jasmine's answer. Calling that attitude isn't playful, it's dismissive. Had now been looped into hundreds of reaction videos and used as a soundtrack for stories from women across the country. One TikTok creator layered Jasmine's quote over a montage of her own workplace microaggressions, being asked to smile more, told she was too much, having her feedback labeled hostile in team meetings. Another user posted a silent text-only video. "This is for every time I swallowed a truth, just to keep the room comfortable." It had over 2 million likes in 2 days. The moment had transcended the people who created it. It was no longer just Jasmine versus Ellen. It was Jasmine versus the format. And she had broken it, but Jasmine. She wasn't watching the reaction, not really, she didn't need to. By the following week, she was back on Capitol Hill, in a budget meeting, challenging a line item about federal housing equity. While the world was dissecting her 10-minute segment on daytime television, she was back to doing the work, because to her that's what the visibility was for. "If we don't use this moment to open the door wider, it'll just become a meme," she told Talia quietly during a staff check-in. "And I'm not interested in going viral, I'm interested in policy." Still, the ripple effect could not be stopped. MSNBC invited her for a follow-up segment. She declined. A late-night host offered to let her set the record straight. She didn't respond. What she did do was accept an invitation to speak at a community college in Baton Rouge. No cameras, no stage lights, just a folding table in a rec center gym with about 50 young women and a microphone that worked half the time. I know you all saw the clip, she said, and you probably expected me to be louder, more dramatic, maybe even mean. But what I gave you was something this world doesn't usually allow women like us: silence with authority. She looked out at the crowd. Some nodded, some leaned forward. They'll call you everything before they call you correct. They'll say you're emotional, aggressive extra. But here's the truth. If your voice makes people uncomfortable, they probably weren't listening to begin with. Applause, not explosive, just genuine. Afterwards, one student came up to her with tears in her eyes. I always thought I had to smile to survive. Jasmine just looked her in the eye and said, "Smiling isn't the same as being safe. You already survived. Now speak." Back in Los Angeles, Ellen's next show opened with a carefully written monologue. Yesterday, we had a powerful moment with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. It reminded me that sometimes we hear ourselves in the room, but not others. And I'm still learning. Some in the audience clapped, some didn't. Online reactions were mixed. Too little, too late, one tweet read. Another said, she just realized what it feels like to be corrected on live TV and not be able to joke her way out of it. But Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because the lesson had already landed. That correction wasn't cruel. It was necessary. And it wasn't about Ellen personally. It was about a culture one that so often asks black women to soften, to shrink, to be entertaining and agreeable at all times, lest they be labeled hostile, angry, or too much. Jasmine had denied that culture its expected script. She hadn't played the role. She had played herself. And now the rest of the world had to decide how to react. That weekend, The New Yorker published a long-form think piece titled "Not Angry Accurate Jasmine Crockett and the Quiet Revolution of Tone." It dissected everything from rhetorical structures to systemic bias in public communication. But its conclusion was simple. Crockett did not come to perform. She came to remind us what respect sounds like when it isn't smiling to be tolerated. The quote went viral again. By Monday, a school district in New Jersey used her clip in a teacher development session. A pastor in Atlanta used her moment as the foundation of a Sunday sermon, and a group of Latina organizers in El Paso printed her face on the cover of a voter education pamphlet with the words, "Stand your ground," even when it's carpeted and televised. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept showing up in committee meetings, in community forums, in late-night Zoom calls with constituents. She didn't carry the moment like a badge. She carried it like a responsibility. And that's why it stayed with people. Not because she won, but because she didn't waver, because she never once made herself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. That was the moment's legacy, and it was just getting started. By the time most of America moved on to the next viral story, the next scandal, the next 15-second dopamine hit, the reverberations of Jasmine Crockett's refusal to shrink were still expanding quietly, powerfully beneath the surface. Because the thing about a legacy like this is that it doesn't scream to be noticed. It moves in whispers and side eyes and classroom discussions and elevator silences. It shifts how people show up, how they speak up, and maybe most importantly, how they no longer apologize for it. In the weeks after that now iconic daytime showdown, Jasmine didn't seek to capitalize on the attention. She didn't drop a merch line. She didn't build a media tour around the moment. No viral t-shirt campaign, no strategic podcast drop. She just kept doing the work. And that in itself was revolutionary. She returned to Congress with the same cadence she left, it measured, unbothered, focused. And the tone around her had changed. In a bipartisan housing committee meeting, a Republican staffer whispered to his colleague, "Watch her. She doesn't waste her breath." A lobbyist who once dismissed her as too online now referred to her as the most prepared person in the room. Even her critics, those who claimed she made Ellen look bad for clout, had gone quiet, not because they agreed with her, but because they knew arguing with receipts and restraint only made them look worse. But perhaps the most telling shift happened outside of D.C. In a tiny high school auditorium in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the folding chairs were half filled with students in hoodies and sneakers, teachers with notepads, and a few elders sitting in the back, arms folded. The lighting was dim. The mic stand was slightly crooked. But none of that mattered. Jasmine Crockett had been invited to speak by a local youth empowerment group, and she'd said yes, not for the cameras, but because this is where the real work lives. And, in the middle of her remarks, right between a story about a failed bill and a point about food insecurity, a soft voice broke in from the back. It belonged to a teenage girl named Alondra, 15 years old, box braids, notebook clutched to her chest like armor. "I saw you on Ellen," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "You didn't yell, but—" She backed off. That made me think maybe I don't have to change how I talk either. You could hear the sharp inhale across the room. Jasmine stepped off the stage, walked toward her, not fast, not performative, just present. When she reached Alondra, she didn't grab the mic or make a speech. She just said loud enough for the room to feel it. Your voice doesn't need fixing, it needs space. It wasn't a lesson in debate, it was a lesson in dignity. And that's the thing no camera caught that day in the studio. It's what Ellen's smile couldn't cover. What the audience didn't know they were seeing, Jasmine wasn't just correcting a moment. She was correcting a habit of disguising disrespect as humor, a habit of treating black women's authority as attitude, a habit of expecting silence when the room gets uncomfortable. And once a habit like that is exposed, it can't unexpose itself. It seeps into how people write scripts, design panels, plan meetings. It makes them think twice about saying, "You're being intense," when what they mean is, "You made me feel small." In the media world, producers started talking differently. An anonymous showrunner told Vulture, "We've built a format that flatters the host and flattens the guest." Jasmine broke that mold, and honestly, we deserved it. Behind the scenes, people were adapting, some reluctantly, some intentionally. Daytime talk show editors began cutting differently. Booking agents reviewed guest briefings with more sensitivity. And show hosts who had long skated by, on charm, started asking themselves a new question. Am I actually listening, or am I managing the room? Jasmine had changed the temperature, and now everyone had to recalibrate. But she wasn't done yet. Because while the viral moment gave her a megaphone, she was more interested in the volume it gave others. She launched a listening tour. 6 cities, small gatherings, no press invites. Community centers, high school gyms, barber shops, youth shelters. And in every room she started with the same words. They invited me on TV to be a moment, but you all, you're the movement. She didn't talk about being attacked. She talked about being assumed to be angry, assumed to be performing, assumed to be lucky to be there. And every time she said it, someone in the room nodded, because they'd felt it too. In Indianapolis, a single mother stood up and said, "My boss says I'm intimidating, but all I ever do is tell the truth." In Albuquerque, a student said, "I get called aggressive for saying things my white classmates get extra credit for." In Richmond, a public defender said, "I've learned how to smile while saying hard things." But that day you reminded me, I don't always have to. And that was the most radical part of it all. Jasmine hadn't modeled defiance. She had modeled permission. Permission to be whole, to take up space, to refuse to make yourself smaller just so someone else can feel tall. And not just in Washington, not just on TV, but in the spaces where it matters most, real life. The kind where there's no applause sign, just eyes watching to see if truth can stand still without flinching. And every time Jasmine showed up and didn't shrink, someone else stood taller. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about posture. And the people watching weren't waiting for the next viral clip. They were waiting for their turn. And Jasmine Crockett was holding the door. Not with grand speeches, not with headlines, but with presence, unapologetic, unbending, unmistakable presence. The kind that doesn't ask for room, but redefines the dimensions of it. Because once someone like Jasmine shows you it's possible to speak without shrinking, you start to look at every space you've ever been asked to be smaller in, and you wonder why you ever accepted it. And people were wondering, out loud, in real time. In dozens of cities across the country, what started as a moment was beginning to grow roots that didn't care about networks or celebrity apologies. They cared about voice, about equity, about truth told without costume. A high school in Sacramento launched a student-led initiative called Say It Like Jasmine. The mission: teach students how to hold boundaries with grace, challenge bias without rage, and most importantly, to never let clarity be mistaken for confrontation. In a public library in Birmingham, a local book club curated a reading list titled Voices That Don't Flinch, inspired by Jasmine's segment. First book, Audre Lorde. Second, a transcript of the Ellen interview, printed, annotated, and stapled like scripture. A poet in Brooklyn wrote, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the floor. And now we walk taller, without asking anymore." Meanwhile, back in D.C., Jasmine's office had changed, not in decor, not in design, but in traffic. Calls came in not just from journalists or donors, but from bus drivers, single dads, grad students, daycare workers, black women who had never considered calling a member of Congress before because they never saw one who spoke like them. The voicemails told their own story. "I didn't know I had the right to not smile. You made me rethink every meeting I've ever left, feeling small. You said the thing I swallowed 10 years ago in my first job. Thank you for not blinking." And for every thanks, Jasmine responded the same way, with more work. She redirected the attention toward issues that never got that kind of spotlight. Budget equity, food deserts, school infrastructure in neglected communities. And she brought the same calm fire to those discussions that she brought to Ellen's couch. Reporters were confused. "You're not going to keep milking this?" But Jasmine just smiled this time, not to disarm, but to clarify. If we don't turn this into something concrete, we're just feeding the same machine we say we want to change. And concrete it became. Within months, Jasmine helped draft 3 new funding initiatives focused on urban education, access maternal health in marginalized neighborhoods, and public safety accountability. They weren't flashy. They didn't trend. But they moved, and in politics, that's revolution enough. Back in LA, Ellen's production team had finally released an internal memo outlining new guest briefing protocols. It included a section titled Tone Assumption and Intersectionality. Jasmine never saw the memo. She didn't need to. Because she had already done what no memo could. She had made them feel it, the discomfort, the pause, the reevaluation, and that lived longer than any rebrand. But perhaps the most powerful thing Jasmine did came quietly. No camera, no crowd, just a room in Dayton, Ohio. A week after the Ellen moment, she stood behind a small wooden podium inside a community center, folding chairs, plastic cups of lemonade, a tray of cookies someone's aunt had made. No press, just people. And Jasmine didn't perform. She shared. Some of y'all saw the clip she began. You saw me not laugh when I was expected to. You saw me stay still when I was supposed to dance. But let me tell you what that moment really was. She paused. It was me refusing to participate in my own distortion. Silence. You don't have to trade your dignity for access, she continued. You don't have to let someone dress up their discomfort as a joke. And if they call it attitude, that's fine. Because now you know what it looks like when truth doesn't shrink. A teenage girl in the front row wiped her eyes. A grandfather in the back tapped his cane against the floor in agreement, and afterward, Jasmine stayed. She didn't leave through a VIP entrance. She shook hands, she hugged, she listened, and when someone asked her if she was tired, she answered honestly, "Yeah, but I'm not done." Because the truth is, moments like hers, they don't just shift conversations, they shift expectations. And expectations are what systems are built on. If we expect black women to be palatable before we believe them, Jasmine dismantled that. If we expect women in power to smile through insults, Jasmine disrupted that. If we expect dignity to only come in soft voices and softer edges, Jasmine destroyed that. She didn't do it for applause. She did it for the girl in the back of the room who's been told her whole life to say it nicer, say it smaller, say it softer. That girl, she's watching now, and next time she might not shrink either. That's the real legacy. Not trending, but transforming. Not for a segment, but for a generation. So, if you're still asking what Jasmine Crockett did that day on Ellen's couch, here's the answer. She redefined what it means to be heard. Not by raising her voice, but by refusing to lower it, and America will never forget the sound.